The fire started around 3 a.m. on a Wednesday in October. Electrical issue in the kitchen spread fast, and by the time the fire department got there, my entire apartment was gone. Everything I owned, 5 years of building my life after college, just ash. I stood there in my pajamas and flip-flops watching my whole world burn down while my landlord kept asking about insurance like that was going to bring back my grandfather's guitar or the photo albums from when dad was still alive. I called my mom first because that's what you do, right? Called her at 4 a.m. and told her what happened, that I needed somewhere to crash for a few days while I figured things out. Her response still plays in my head 3 years later. She told me their guest room was being used for storage, and Albert, my older brother, was already staying there temporarily after his divorce. No room for me. I asked about the couch, the basement, anywhere. She said I was 28 years old and should have figured my life out by now instead of always coming to them with my problems. That's when I knew this wasn't really about space. See, I've been the family disappointment since high school. While Albert was getting his business degree and Judith was becoming a teacher, I went to community college for graphic design. While they bought houses in the suburbs, I rented apartments and worked freelance. While they had stable relationships and kids, I dated around and focused on my career. To them, I was the one who never grew up, never settled down, never became respectable like them. But the real breaking point came when I refused to loan Albert 15 grand for his startup 3 years ago. I had the money saved up, but I'd seen his business plans and they were garbage. I told him no, said I wasn't throwing away my savings on a venture that would fail in 6 months. I was right, by the way. His startup died within 4 months, but instead of admitting I was smart to keep my money, they all acted like I was selfish for not helping family. That's why when I called Albert next, he actually laughed. He told me hotels exist for a reason, and maybe I should stop being everyone's burden. When I mentioned I'd helped him move twice and let him borrow my truck for months, he said that was different because he was going through a divorce and deserved support. I was just dealing with the consequences of my choices. Judith was worse. She lived in a 4-bedroom house with just her and her boyfriend Logan, but when I called, she immediately started talking about how she couldn't have me stinking up their lives. She said I'd always been the family disappointment anyway, and this was probably just karma catching up to me. When I reminded her that I'd helped her through her depression 2 years ago, staying with her for weeks when Logan was deployed, she said that was what brothers are supposed to do, but this was different. The final call was back to Mom. By then I was getting angry because the pattern was clear. They weren't saying no because of space or convenience. They were saying no because they wanted to punish me for not being the person they thought I should be. When I told Mom that I'd find my own way and wouldn't bother them anymore, she said maybe the fire was God's way of getting rid of me. That's when something clicked in my brain. Not sadness, not shock, just cold calculation. I realized I'd been playing this family game wrong for years. I'd been trying to earn their respect and love while they'd already decided I was worthless. But I had something they didn't know about. I'd been working freelance for 3 years, building up a client base, and I'd been saving money specifically because I knew my family couldn't be counted on. The next day, while I was staying at a hotel and dealing with insurance, Judith called Mom to complain about Logan. Apparently, he'd been having problems at work and needed somewhere to stay while he figured things out. Mom immediately offered the guest room, the same guest room that was supposedly too full of storage for her own son. When Albert heard, he moved his stuff to the basement without being asked, so Logan could have the room. Judith called it sweet how the family was rallying around Logan during his tough time. Mom cooked his favorite meals and did his laundry. They treated him like a beloved son while I was paying $200 a night for a hotel room. That was when I realized this wasn't about space or inconvenience. This was about the fact that they genuinely hated me. They'd rather help my sister's boyfriend, someone they'd known for 2 years, than their own flesh and blood. They'd rather see me homeless than admit they might be wrong about me. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been preparing for something like this my whole life. Not the fire specifically, but the moment when they'd show their true colors. I'd been building my business, saving money, and creating independence specifically so I'd never need them. And now that they'd made it clear where I stood, I could finally stop pretending we were a loving family. Because while they were busy helping Logan get back on his feet, I was quietly gathering information. Every family dinner I'd attended over the years, every conversation I'd overheard, every detail about their finances and personal lives I'd picked up, I'd always paid attention, always remembered, because some part of me suspected this day would come. Albert's alimony payments were killing him financially. Judith's relationship with Logan was already shaky because of his drinking. Mom's retirement account was smaller than she pretended because Dad's medical bills had wiped out most of their savings. All information I'd collected over the years without really thinking about it. Now I had a use for it. The hotel manager mentioned they had monthly rates for extended stays, and I realized I could afford to stay there for months if needed. Insurance was going to cover my losses plus living expenses, and my freelance business could operate from anywhere. I wasn't desperate or dependent like they thought. I was free. That's when I started making my real plans. Not just for rebuilding my life, but for showing them exactly what they'd lost when they chose to abandon their own family. They wanted to treat Logan like family and me like trash. Fine. But they were going to learn that treating people like trash has consequences, especially when that person has been watching and waiting for 3 years. Update 1. So the comments on my last post were insane, and you guys really helped me see this situation clearly. Some of you asked for updates, and honestly, things have gotten so much worse but also so much better, if that makes sense. It's been 2 weeks since the fire, and I'm still at the hotel, but now it's by choice. Insurance came through faster than expected, and I've got a decent temporary living allowance, plus my freelance work has actually picked up because I've had more time to focus on it. Turns out not having family drama constantly in the background makes you more productive. Who knew? But here's where it gets interesting. Mom called me last Friday, not to check how I was doing, but to complain about Logan. Apparently, he's been staying in their guest room for 10 days now, and she's getting tired of him leaving dishes everywhere and using up all their hot water. She actually had the audacity to suggest that maybe I could talk to Judith about getting him to move out sooner. I told her that was rich, coming from someone who said their house was too full for their own son, but apparently had plenty of room for someone else's boyfriend. She got defensive and started explaining how Logan was going through a really hard time at work and needed family support. When I pointed out that I was literally homeless and they turned me away, she said that was different because Logan isn't used to handling problems on his own like I am. That conversation told me everything I needed to know about how they really see me. I'm the one who's supposed to handle everything alone while everyone else gets help and sympathy. I'm the one who's supposed to be understanding and supportive while they treat me like garbage. So I started paying more attention to what was actually going on with Logan's situation. Called Judith the next day and had a long conversation about how things were going with him staying there. She was surprisingly chatty about it, probably because she was frustrated and needed to vent to someone. Turns out Logan didn't just have problems at work. He got fired 3 weeks ago for showing up drunk and hasn't told anyone in the family except Judith. He's been pretending to still have his job, leaving the house every morning and coming back in the evening like he'd been working. The reason he needs to stay with my parents isn't because of temporary problems, it's because he can't make rent anymore and is about to get evicted. But here's the kicker. Judith thinks this is just a rough patch, and he'll find another job soon. She has no idea that Logan has been lying about his drinking for months. I know this because I was at their house for dinner back in August and saw him sneaking drinks from a flask in the bathroom. I didn't say anything at the time because it wasn't my business, but now I'm realizing Logan has a serious alcohol problem that nobody else in my family has figured out yet. So while they're all rallying around him and treating him like the son they wish they had, he's basically a functioning alcoholic who lost his job and is lying to everyone about it. And they chose him over their actual son who just needed help after a fire. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But not the kind of anger that makes you do stupid things, the kind that makes you very, very focused. I started doing some digging. Logan works, or worked, at a warehouse distribution center across town. I called them pretending to be verifying employment for a rental application and confirmed he was terminated 3 weeks ago for violation of company policy. When I pressed for details, they said it was alcohol-related and he's not eligible for rehire. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have, but I was curious. I drove by his old apartment complex on Wednesday when I knew he'd be at my parents' house pretending to job hunt. Talked to the property manager about the unit I was supposedly interested in renting, the one right next to his. She mentioned they'd had problems with the tenant in that unit being consistently late on rent and causing noise complaints from neighbors about loud arguments and music at all hours. His lease is up at the end of this month and they're not renewing it. He has 12 days to find somewhere else to live, but my family doesn't know any of this. They think they're helping someone through a temporary rough patch. They have no idea they've invited a lying alcoholic who's about to be homeless to take over their house while rejecting their own flesh and blood. The beautiful part is that Logan is going to have to tell them the truth soon, either when he gets evicted and needs help moving his stuff, or when he can't keep up the pretense of having a job much longer. And when that happens, they're going to realize what kind of person they chose over their own son. But I'm not going to just wait for that to happen naturally. I'm going to make sure it happens in the most devastating way possible. See, I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks now, and I've realized something important. They didn't reject me because they didn't have space. They rejected me because they don't respect me. They see me as the family screw-up who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention they throw my way. They think I'm weak and desperate, and will always come crawling back no matter how they treat me. They're about to learn how wrong they are. I've been keeping detailed notes about everything Logan has told different family members, all the lies he's been spinning to keep up his cover. I know exactly when his lease ends, exactly how much he owes in back rent, exactly what his employment situation really is. I know about the drinking problem that Judith doesn't want to admit and the financial problems that Mom and Albert don't even suspect. And I know something else they don't know. Logan's been trying to get Judith to move in with him to help with expenses, but she's been hesitant because she likes living alone. Now that he's about to be homeless, he's going to get more desperate and more pushy about it. That's going to put strain on their relationship right when she's already starting to question whether this guy is really worth it. The plan I'm working on is going to hit all of them where it hurts most. Albert's going to lose his precious guest room privileges when the truth about Logan comes out and Mom gets embarrassed. Judith's going to realize her boyfriend has been lying to her face for weeks, while her own family supported him. Mom's going to have to face the fact that she chose a lying drunk over her own son and that everyone's going to know about it. But that's just the beginning. Because once Logan's lies get exposed and the family starts falling apart over it, I'm going to make sure they understand exactly what they lost when they chose him over me. I've got appointments lined up with 3 different apartment complexes next week, and I'm going to sign a lease on a really nice place, better than any of their houses. I'm going to send them photos of my new apartment with a message thanking them for teaching me that I don't need family who treats me like garbage. And then I'm going to make sure Logan knows exactly how much I know about his situation, right when he's most desperate and my family is most disappointed in him, right when he has nowhere else to go and no one left to lie to. Because if they want to play games about who deserves support and who doesn't, I'm going to show them what happens when they pick the wrong side. Update 2. You guys, this is getting absolutely insane, and I honestly don't know whether to laugh or be completely furious at this point. The level of hypocrisy from my family has reached new heights that I didn't even think were possible. So remember how I said Logan's lease was up at the end of this month? Well, yesterday was moving day for him. And let me tell you how this played out because it's actually unbelievable. I decided to drive by his apartment complex around noon, just to see if anything interesting was happening. And oh boy, was it interesting. There was an eviction notice taped to his door, and Logan was outside loading stuff into Albert's truck. My brother Albert was there, helping him move, looking all proud of himself for being such a good guy helping someone in need. But here's where it gets really good. I parked across the street and watched this whole scene unfold. Logan's landlord came out and started talking to them about unpaid rent and damages to the unit. I couldn't hear everything, but I saw Albert pull out his wallet and write a check. My brother, who couldn't spare a couch for his own sibling after a fire, was paying Logan's back rent and security deposit fees. When they finished loading the truck, I followed them back to Mom's house. They were moving Logan's stuff into the basement, making it a permanent living situation. Albert was carrying boxes and furniture like he was helping his best friend, talking about how Logan just needed a fresh start and how family helps family. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. That evening, I called Judith to see how she felt about Logan essentially moving in with our parents permanently. She was actually excited about it because it meant they could spend more time together and Mom could help Logan get back on his feet. She kept going on about how generous and loving our family is, how we always support each other through tough times. I asked her directly if she thought it was fair that they had room for Logan to live in the basement, but couldn't find space for me for even a few days after I lost everything in a fire. She got quiet for a long time, then said that was totally different because Logan is going to be part of the family soon anyway, and I should understand that I'm older and more capable of handling things on my own. That's when I realized they weren't just choosing Logan over me temporarily. They were choosing him permanently. They were literally replacing me with him in the family dynamic. So I decided it was time to start phase 1 of my plan. I drove over to Mom's house on Saturday afternoon when I knew Logan would be there. Told Mom I wanted to apologize for being difficult about the whole situation and maybe get to know Logan better since he was obviously important to the family now. Mom was so relieved and happy. She kept talking about how she knew I'd come around and how Logan was such a good influence on everyone. She called Logan down from the basement and introduced us properly for the first time. Logan was friendly enough, probably because he thought I was going to cause problems and was relieved I seemed cool with the situation. We sat in the living room and had what seemed like a normal conversation about his work situation and how grateful he was for the family's support. That's when I started asking the right questions. I mentioned that I was looking for work myself and asked where he was employed, thinking maybe they were hiring. Logan got a little uncomfortable and said he was between jobs right now but had some promising leads. I asked what kind of work he'd been doing, and he gave me some vague answer about warehouse management. Then I mentioned that I'd been thinking about applying at some of the distribution centers around town since they usually pay pretty well. Asked if he knew anything about the big one across town, whether it was a good place to work. Logan's face went completely white. He started stuttering about how he'd heard they weren't treating employees very well and I should probably look elsewhere. Mom jumped in talking about how Logan was being modest and had actually been very successful there before he decided to look for better opportunities. I nodded along and said I'd probably still check it out, maybe mention his name as a reference if they asked about previous employees. Logan practically panicked and said that wasn't a good idea because he'd left on bad terms with his supervisor and it might hurt my chances. The lies were just pouring out of him, and he was getting more tangled up with every word. Mom was starting to look confused because his story wasn't matching what he'd told her before. Then I went in for the kill. I asked Logan directly how long he'd been staying with Mom and Albert, just making conversation. He said about 2 weeks. I said that was cool, and mentioned that I'd actually seen his old apartment complex when I was looking at places in that area. Mentioned how nice it seemed and asked if he'd recommend it. Logan said no, the management was terrible and that's why he'd moved out early. Said they were trying to charge him for damages he didn't cause. Mom was really listening now because this was the first she'd heard about any of this. I kept pushing, asked what kind of damages they were claiming, acting like I was just curious about what to watch out for. Logan started making up stuff about carpet cleaning and paint touch-ups, getting more nervous by the minute. That's when I casually mentioned that I'd talked to the property manager there about availability, and she'd mentioned they'd had problems with noise complaints and late rent payments from one of the units. Asked if he knew anything about that. Logan's whole demeanor changed. He got defensive and started talking about how property managers always exaggerate problems to justify keeping security deposits. Said you couldn't trust anything they told prospective tenants. Mom was watching this exchange with growing suspicion. I could see her starting to piece together that Logan's stories weren't adding up. Then I played my ace card. I said I'd actually run into someone who used to work at the distribution center across town, and they'd mentioned there had been some layoffs recently due to policy violations. Asked Logan if he knew anyone who'd been affected by that. The color completely drained from his face. He said he didn't know anything about layoffs, and maybe we should change the subject since it was probably sensitive for people who'd lost their jobs. Mom asked what kind of policy violations would cause layoffs. I said my contact hadn't given details, but mentioned it was serious enough that the people affected weren't eligible for rehire. Logan got up and said he needed to get some air, went out to the back porch and didn't come back. After he left, Mom sat there for a long time, not saying anything. Finally, she asked me why I was asking all those questions. I told her I was just trying to get to know Logan better and understand his situation since the family was investing so much in helping him. She asked what I meant by investing. I reminded her that Albert had paid Logan's back rent and moving expenses, and now they were providing free housing indefinitely. Mentioned that it seemed like a pretty big commitment to make for someone they'd only known for 2 years. Mom said Logan was going through a rough patch and deserved their support because he was going to be part of the family. I asked her how she could be so sure about that when Judith and Logan had only been together for 2 years and weren't even engaged. She got defensive and said some people deserve the benefit of the doubt. That's when I asked her directly why Logan deserved the benefit of the doubt when her own son didn't. The conversation ended with her telling me that Logan hadn't asked to be in this situation and was grateful for their help. While I had always been independent and prideful and acted like I didn't need family, I left knowing that I'd planted enough seeds of doubt to make her start questioning Logan's story. But more importantly, I'd made it clear that I was paying attention and wasn't going to quietly disappear just because they'd chosen him over me. Because what Mom doesn't know yet is that I've been documenting every lie Logan has told, every inconsistency in his story, every dollar Albert has spent bailing him out. And I've been building a timeline that shows exactly when each family member chose to help Logan while simultaneously refusing to help me. Phase 2 starts this week when I have my follow-up conversations with each family member individually. I'm going to make sure they all understand exactly what choice they made and what it's going to cost them. But first, I need to wait for Logan to make his next mistake, because based on how panicked he got today, he's going to try to get ahead of this somehow. And when he does, that's when I'll have everything I need to bring this whole house of cards crashing down. Final update. Holy crap, you guys. I can't even begin to describe what happened this week. If you thought my family was messed up before, wait until you hear how this all went down. My phone has been absolutely blowing up, and I finally understand what real panic looks like. So remember how I said I was waiting for Logan to make his next mistake? Well, he made it. And it was even better than I could have planned. 3 days after my conversation with him and Mom, Logan apparently decided he needed to do some damage control. He went to Albert and spun this whole story about how I was asking weird questions and seemed to be trying to cause problems in the family. Told Albert that I was probably jealous of the support he was getting and might try to sabotage his job search. Albert, being the stellar brother he is, immediately called Mom to warn her that I was stirring up trouble. Mom called Judith to get her perspective on whether I seemed bitter about Logan, and Judith, God bless her, decided the best way to handle this was to confront me directly. She showed up at my hotel room on Tuesday night, completely furious, started yelling at me about how I was trying to destroy her relationship and turn the family against Logan just because I was jealous, accused me of being petty and vindictive because they had chosen to help someone who actually deserved it instead of enabling my irresponsible lifestyle. That conversation lasted 2 hours, 2 solid hours of Judith defending Logan and attacking me, while I sat there taking notes on everything she said. She told me Logan was the best thing that had happened to our family, that he brought out the generous and loving side in everyone, and that I had always been too selfish to appreciate what a good man looks like. I let her rant until she was completely exhausted. Then I asked her one simple question. If Logan was such a good man, why had he lied to everyone about losing his job? She said I was making things up to cause drama, so I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording I'd made of my conversation with his former employer, the one where they confirmed he'd been terminated for showing up to work drunk. Judith went completely silent. Then I showed her the photos I'd taken of the eviction notice on his apartment door, the documentation from his property manager about unpaid rent and noise complaints, the timeline I'd built showing exactly when he'd told different family members different stories about his situation. She sat there staring at the evidence for about 10 minutes without saying a word. Then she asked me how long I'd known all this. I told her I'd known since the week after the fire. I'd known the entire time our family was rallying around Logan that he was lying to everyone's faces. I'd watched Albert pay his back rent to cover up his irresponsibility. I'd watched Mom cook him meals and do his laundry while he pretended to go to job interviews. I'd watched them treat him like the son they wish they'd had while treating their actual son like garbage. That's when Judith broke down crying. Not because she felt bad about how they'd treated me, but because she realized her boyfriend had been lying to her for months. She kept asking how she was supposed to face Mom and Albert, how she was supposed to explain that she'd brought a lying alcoholic into their home. I told her that wasn't my problem, that she and the rest of the family had made their choice when they decided Logan deserved help and I didn't, that they were all adults who could figure out their own messes. She begged me not to tell Mom and Albert what I knew, said it would destroy the family and humiliate everyone. She promised to talk to Logan and get him to leave quietly, and they could all pretend this never happened. That's when I told her it was too late for that. See, while Judith was having her breakdown in my hotel room, I was already executing phase 2 of my plan. I'd spent the previous week reaching out to everyone in our extended family and social circle. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends, neighbors, people from church, anyone who had heard about my house fire and the family's generous support of Logan. I'd been having very concerned conversations with all of them about Logan's situation, mentioned how worried I was about him because he seemed to be struggling with some personal issues that he wasn't getting proper help for, how I'd tried to connect him with some resources for people dealing with job loss and housing instability, but he'd been resistant to getting professional support. I'd shared my concerns about his drinking very carefully and always in the context of wanting to help him. Mentioned that I was worried the family might be enabling him instead of encouraging him to address his underlying problems. Every conversation was recorded. Every person I talked to walked away thinking I was the concerned, responsible family member trying to help Logan get the support he really needed. By the time Judith was begging me to keep quiet, word was already spreading through our entire social network that Logan wasn't who he pretended to be, that he'd been lying about his job situation and taking advantage of my family's generosity, that Albert had been paying his bills while Logan pretended to be financially stable. The next morning, Mom started getting phone calls. Concerned friends asking if it was true that they were supporting someone who had been lying to them. Neighbors wondering if they should be worried about having someone with a drinking problem living in the neighborhood. Church members offering to help connect Logan with addiction support services. By noon, Mom's phone was ringing constantly. By evening, Albert was getting calls at work. By the end of the week, Judith was getting approached by people at the grocery store asking how Logan was doing with his recovery. That's when my phone started buzzing. 45 messages. I counted them. First batch came from Mom. Panic about the neighbors talking, asking how this information got out, begging me to help explain to people that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. She wanted me to call Aunt Bernice and Uncle Victor to clarify that Logan was just going through a rough patch. Then Albert started texting, furious at first, demanding to know what I'd told people, then confused when he realized I hadn't actually told anyone anything false, then desperate when his coworkers started asking about his family situation. Judith sent the longest messages, pages of text about how embarrassed she was, how she couldn't show her face anywhere, how Logan had left town because he couldn't handle everyone knowing the truth about him. She begged me to help fix this situation, to tell everyone that we'd worked things out as a family. The last messages came from Mom again. She was crying when she called, asking me to please come home so we could figure out how to handle this together. She said she understood now that they'd made mistakes, that they should have supported me after the fire, that she was sorry for choosing Logan over her own son. But here's the thing. It was too late for sorry. I'd spent a month watching them treat a lying alcoholic better than their own flesh and blood. I'd watched Albert pay Logan's rent while telling me I should be able to handle my problems alone. I'd watched Mom cook for Logan while telling me there wasn't room in their house for me. I'd watched Judith praise Logan's character while calling me the family disappointment. They'd had every opportunity to make the right choice. They'd had every opportunity to show that blood meant something. Instead, they'd chosen to support someone they barely knew while abandoning someone they'd raised. So when Mom called begging me to come home and help fix the embarrassment they'd brought on themselves, I told her I already was home. In my new apartment that I'd signed the lease for with my insurance money and the business income I'd have built while they were busy playing house with Logan. I told her that Logan leaving town was probably the best thing that could happen to all of them, since now they could stop pretending they were the kind of people who help family in need. And I told her that the next time she wanted to lecture me about being independent and prideful, she should remember that independence and pride were exactly what allowed me to survive when my own family abandoned me. The messages stopped after that. It's been 2 weeks now, and I haven't heard from any of them. Word around town is that Albert's struggling financially because Logan left him with unpaid debts. Judith's been asking around to see if anyone knows where Logan went, but nobody cares enough to help her find him. Mom's been having trouble at church because people keep asking how she could have been so fooled by someone with such obvious problems. And me? I'm doing great. My business is thriving. My new apartment is twice as nice as the one that burned down, and I haven't had to deal with a single family crisis in weeks. Turns out I really didn't need them after all. The best part is they all learned exactly what happens when you choose poorly. They thought Logan was going to be part of their family forever, and I was going to disappear quietly. Instead, Logan disappeared and they're stuck living with everyone knowing they abandoned their own son for a lying drunk. They wanted to teach me a lesson about consequences. Mission accomplished.